For those who have clicked on this video accidentally, this is a spoiler warning for the art book leak for Tears of the Kingdom. This is your warning.
Hey, listen!
Welcome everyone, this is Honest Restart, and we are finally doing the analysis on the art book. Now, a few things to keep in mind. This will be the only time we will focus on this subject until this information is officially announced by Nintendo. Also, because of circumstances, the way we're showing imagery will be a little bit different than usual. And I also don't think the spoilers here are necessarily super significant, because this is a part of the art book that we get with the collector's edition that may be seen by players before they even play the game. That all said, I divided this into 10 different categories or theories that I felt were fairly significant. So let's get started. With the first bit of imagery from the art book, we see an image that shows Link down the end of this narrow pathway that is a ruin that looks to be one of the Sky Islands. You can see the Zonai ruins, you can see Link facing out what appears to be the sky, and he's in his underwear. This isn't too different from how Link starts the game in Breath of the Wild in the Shrine of Resurrection, which also is somewhat of a narrow path as well that opens up in the Great Plateau. And considering one of the teaser trailers, we see this shot where Link is lying down, his hand is glowing, he's also in his underwear there. It could be the case that after the fight with Ganon, where the Master Sword is damaged, his hand is damaged, he perhaps collapses, perhaps he needs to be resuscitated, perhaps there's even somewhat of a time skip here after he's somehow rescued and taken up into the sky. This could potentially explain why Link's hair is longer because some time passes, but it also could just be that Link's hair is no longer tied up, so it only just looked longer. And there's actually this other piece of imagery that shows a young adult form of Purah who is giving Link a hair tie again. So maybe the case that when Link returns to the surface, he sees Purah and she gives him back his hair ties so he can get back his original look. However, Purah has changed. Why has she changed? Has she simply gotten a better rap on her technology and she was able to aid herself appropriately? Or could it be that so much time has passed that her child form has matured into a young adult? Before this leak, I was thinking that there was definitely going to be some level of expanded sea exploration. And we've gotten some imagery here that supports this idea. So we see this fish, and there's a version of the fish that a translation suggests is luminous, perhaps bioluminescent, a fish that would be in the deep parts of the ocean or sea, implying that there will be deep sea exploration. But we also see imagery for a ship, a pirate ship. In one of the shots, it even looks like it's upon water by the shoreline, so it's not just randomly in a desert or something like that. So with there being pirate ships upon water and potentially bioluminescent deep sea fish, it further strengthens the idea that they are expanding upon sea travel. The art here is showing a lot for weapon crafting and even some new gear. We're seeing this new mask that looks a lot like the Hawkeye mask from Twilight Princess, which allowed you to zoom in, and we even see a depiction of the eyeglass, and it's shown to be thicker, suggesting magnification, just like the zoom feature in the Hawkeye mask. And we even see new clothes for Link that look like another way to glide through the sky. But what's most interesting here is all the new details on weapon crafting. We see bokoblins and other enemy types with their different classes and different headpieces, and we see that these headpieces are actually part of new weaponry. And with a lot of monster parts, we're seeing them attached to a sword, and the suggestion here is that they can be used as new tools or weapons. We even see the sword attached to different variants of a stone talus heart. But what most interests me about this topic is the Smelter's Blast Furnace. So the translation tells us that there's this structure underground, because we can see it with the weird plant life and the spores like in the underground from the trailer, and it's translated as Smelter's Blast Furnace Spores version. Perhaps there are other furnaces in the underground that don't have spores. And we even also see a conveyor belt, and it has the egg-like shape, and all this looks like more Zonai ruins. So it looks like there are Zonai ruins in the underground, and they had a lot of technology to smelt things, to craft things. So this may be used to put things together. And if the Zonai ruins are tied to a lot of the dungeons and there is this massive quest to restore the Master Sword, maybe there are going to be some special places that are meant to reforge the Master Sword. The ideal place to reforge or mend a sword would be at a smelter's blast furnace. I think when Nintendo revealed the sky, a lot of people really started to underestimate just how expansive the underground would be. They thought the entire focus would be just the sky, and clearly the sky is a big part of Tears of the Kingdom. But let's also keep in mind, the very first trailer for Tears of the Kingdom was actually all underground. And as we've gotten more footage, it seems like there is more to this underground. The most recent trailer shows some shots suggesting fairly expansive areas. So with the details we have from this art book, I think it's further supporting this idea that there's a lot to this underground, including overworld bosses. So, we see this new enemy. There's a red one, a white one, a green one. And they look amphibious in nature, but I speculate they're actually rather large, for a couple reasons. So firstly, notice their tusks or fangs. They look pretty significant, but if you take into consideration that we already have evidence that most enemies are going to have weapons upon their heads that we can break off and use as weapons, what if these tusks are basically like two-handed weapons? And consider how big some of these two-handed weapons were in Breath of the Wild, almost the size of Link or close to it. With that in mind, that could give us a good understanding of just how large these enemies are in comparison to Link. They are boss-sized enemies, perhaps even bigger than a stone talus. But what might even be more telling are these rocks we've seen upon their back. Now, we've seen the stone talus have one rock that we can mine upon their back from Breath of the Wild, but these have several. So we may be climbing these enemies and mining upon their backs to obtain resources and potentially damage them too. Now, I am assuming that these are underground creatures, but considering their design, amphibious but too thick to be a swimmer, and with these giant rocks upon them, that does kind of go along with the theme of a deep, mountainous, subterranean style kind of creature. So if the underground is going to be so vast that there are the occasional overworld bosses that are potentially larger than some of the ones we saw in Breath of the Wild, well, we're probably going to need some more means of transportation. And actually, we've seen some imagery showing more mine tracks with more mine carts, so we may be riding some mine tracks throughout the underground in Tears of the Kingdom. But we also get a little bit more clarity on something we saw from the trailer. So in the trailer, we see this shot where Link is upon some sort of Sheikah symbol and surrounded by these guardian-like claws, but one of them is holding some sort of round object that we weren't sure quite what it was. Some people thought it might be a microphone, but now it looks more like wire. And we see imagery in the art book that shows this wire actually, and it lights up. So it looks like there may be sections like what we see in the trailer where we will be riding the wire down to get deep into the underground. There's a huge emphasis on underground exploration here. It's not just a couple small pockets. And actually, we see quite a few ruins that are underground as well, a lot of Zonai architecture. And I think this supports my personal theory that there are going to be a lot of Zonai Shrines that are connecting from the ground to the sky. But before we move on, I also want to talk about this one particular tower that shows like a green-like gem. This gem we actually see being hung by a Hinox in a cave that's chasing Link in the most recent trailer. So it looks like this gem is something we can take to particular towers in the underground. There are going to be shrine-like puzzles in the underground, alongside minecarts and tracks, wire taking you deep down there, and giant overworld amphibious bosses. There has been a lot of speculation that Demise could be making a return in Tears of the Kingdom, and I don't believe this. However, with the art book, there's a little bit of extra imagery that seems to be fueling that argument. So there's this image that's basically just an expanded view of one of these Stonewall illustrations we saw from the title reveal trailer. And in it we still see this army of Ganon following a wave of malice, but now we see a good look of what appears to be the Blood Moon. It's very pronounced, and it also shows a giant Ganon. We see him with his special garb, we see him with his orange beard and hair, and even a pronounced horn. So when you consider that there's this huge emphasis on the underground, and there's a lot of malice from there, and we saw Ganondorf's corpse there, and there's malice erupting from the underground, and this malice seems to be related to this even more pronounced blood moon, and the horns have become more significant and more extravagant upon every enemy, and this imagery is showing a Ganon with a more pronounced horn as well. It could be fueling the idea of maybe not so much Demise himself, but Ganon becoming increasingly more and more like Demise, a proper king of demons from the underworld, hence the more pronounced blood moon, hence the more pronounced horns, hence them all coming from the underground, or maybe even a hell or the underworld, a realm of the demons. And if Ganon is taking on more of a role like Demise, this also fuels another theory that we could perhaps be seeing the renewing of a cycle. You see, Demise is from the beginning of the Zelda timeline, and this version of Ganon is towards the end of the timeline, but the more towards the future we go, the more Ganon becomes like Demise. Perhaps there is something to this idea of this Ouroboros-like symbol we see in Tears of the Kingdom. It could perhaps suggest something about this cycle, something connecting Ganon and Demise. When we consider that one silhouette we saw from the teaser trailer where it showed something that looked Demise-like even though it was the body of Ganondorf, there could be something there. I'm not saying it's Demise himself, but I am saying that perhaps Ganon is taking on more and more of that role, becoming the true, proper Demon King. One of the most common questions asked about Tears of the Kingdom is if we're going to see the return of dungeons. And the imagery in this art book doesn't 100% confirm it, but it strongly supports it. We see a number of structures that fit certain elemental themes. We see water, fire, forest, even potentially desert with these camel depictions on the walls. And some of these structures that Link will be exploring are very large in scale. We see Link by comparison, and they are far larger than any shrine we saw in Breath of the Wild. So at the very least, there are going to be challenges with elemental themes that are very large in scale. And we even see one piece of imagery that shows what appears to be one of those tiers from the title reveal trailer, one of the 7. And there's been some speculation that we're going to collect 7 tiers of the kingdom, perhaps relating to the 7 sages, all in an effort to somehow perhaps either restore the Master Sword or prepare Link so he can stop Ganon. Now, if you're looking for more information and theories on dungeons, last week I actually put out an entire dedicated video on the return of dungeons, so you can check that out after this one. While there may seem like there's evidence for some level of return of classic-style dungeons, there's also a great deal of evidence for the return of shrines as well, except this time they won't be Sheikah shrines, but rather Zonai Shrines. We see a lot of this special spirally magic all around. And we see one of these structures that we've seen all throughout the surface actually on a sky island as well. And it further fuels my theory that these structures are portals or launching points. We see the very first one in the very first teaser where Link battles Ganon and he resurrects. My theory is that this is how he escaped with that hand. It's a portal to the sky above, and we see one of these green-like spiral areas in the sky. But also we're seeing these areas that look a lot like Sheikah shrines. The ceilings are very similar, just with more of a green theme with these different circles instead. And we're even seeing the green spiral thing being hidden behind a wall or a cage. It looks like you have to solve a puzzle to get through. Very much shrine-like. So my speculation is that we will be going to all these different shrines in the sky and perhaps the surface and down below, and these green spirals that are in them are going to connect these 3 different realms, and as we progress in the game, it'll become more and more easy to traverse between the underground, the surface, and the realms above. And also with these different shrines, like the ones in Breath of the Wild, you'll get some sort of spirit orb that will be used to either improve your heart count or your stamina. In Breath of the Wild, there's an excerpt from Zelda's diary from when she was struggling to obtain her goddess powers that reads, "I had a dream last night. In a place consumed by darkness, a lone woman gazed at me, haloed by blinding light. I sensed she was not of this world. I don't know if she was a fairy or a goddess, but she was beautiful." So during the Calamity, Zelda does eventually obtain her goddess powers. However, at the end of Breath of the Wild, she talks about how her powers have dwindled. How much they have dwindled, we're not entirely sure. And some of the trailers in the game do speak of her falling down a hole, but we'll talk a bit more about her later. I bring this up because we may have evidence for the goddess. In the recent trailer, we see Link shaking hands or holding hands with what appears to be a woman, but this woman might not be Zelda. And actually, the art book shows an image of someone that matches the details we see in the trailer. This woman is holding a basket of fruit. She has white-like markings upon her. She has long hair. She has pointy ears. She's a bit more of a tam, though, so there's a small possibility that perhaps this is not the same person, simply someone with the same type of clothing and bodily shape. But this person does look somewhat fairy-like, or perhaps is Goddess Hylia, someone of the sky. The sky does seem to be something more heavenly, something, well, from the heavens. So the goddess being in this area isn't a total stretch, I would say. Now, what her role plays in all this, the art book doesn't really give us much information on that. However, we do see depictions of other people with similar like white markings upon them, suggesting that there are just straight up sky people. We even see some depictions of particular rooms that are from this sky realm. We see a throne room or some sort of church-like area, and we see a library. It looks like there may just be a village of sky people, and this woman we're seeing from the art book possibly isn't even the goddess, just a woman of this group. But if I had to guess, she seems to be of some importance, and for the most part she does match the woman in the trailer. I feel that in order to fully understand the role of potentially the goddess Hylia in Tears of the Kingdom, we need to also understand fully the role of Zelda in Tears of the Kingdom, because the goddess and Princess Zelda, depending on the game, have been one and the same, and the different iterations of Zelda have at least had the goddess powers, and Zelda at one point had the goddess powers. So that brings me to what the illustrations from the art book has suggested for Zelda. And it still doesn't tell us everything, but it has some interesting implications. So we see some shots of Link and Zelda exploring the underground, the catacombs of Hyrule, as they were from the initial teaser. But there's one part that shows Zelda on her own. And this I find interesting. Link should be with her. How do they get separated? Does it happen before the big resurrection of Ganon? Or is this showing something that happens after she supposedly falls down a hole? Maybe. And it could be implying that there may be some sort of segment or piece to the narrative where we see Zelda exploring the underground on her own. Does it mean we get to play as Zelda in the underground? Possibly. Could it just mean some story segment? Possibly. Or could it just be artwork that doesn't really have to mean anything at all? Possibly. But there is something else I take from this imagery here. We get some other looks at the newly designed Sheikah Slate that we have seen from official illustrations that Zelda has. But what's interesting here is that one shot shows the Sheikah Slate actually with Link, and it's powering this glowing wire that we speculate will be used to take Link underground. So with Zelda potentially exploring the underground on her own, or getting lost there because she falls down a hole, yet she has this new Sheikah Slate, and this new Sheikah Slate is being used for a wire that could potentially take Link in the underground, I feel the implication here is that in somehow, some way, Zelda is going to play a role with underground exploration. There's still not enough information to say for sure, but I'm going to speculate that Zelda will be playing a larger role in this game than we expect. I think that with Zelda not having much of a significant role throughout most of the story of Breath of the Wild, and with fans continually clamoring for more Zelda in the games, even a playable Zelda, the Zelda team is paying attention to that. And I think with her new redesign, I think that they're going to do something a little bit more with her. I'm not saying she'll be playable, but I am thinking that maybe with her falling down a hole, that might be a bit of a fake out, because Zelda is always missing throughout most Zelda games. And maybe this time she'll be doing something throughout the game. We do hear some voice lines from her that suggest that she's still okay after the initial onslaught of Ganon when he's resurrected. But we'll see. And finally, what may be the biggest reveal from this art book, and that is the identity of what I've been calling the Bunny Zonai. And I might not have been too far off, because this character does have long ears and is a fuzzy looking character, somewhat animal-like, not totally human. But what's perhaps the most exciting about this character is what the translation is suggesting for the name, Rauru, the Light Sage from Ocarina of Time. And the implication here is that our theories about those 7 orbs, those 7 tiers maybe, being representative of 7 sages, and there potentially being 7 major dungeons that we have to seek out in hopes to restore the Master Sword or to prepare Link in some way to defeat Ganondorf, it now makes even more sense with the confirmation that this character is named Rauru. This character may very well be a sage. Now, it doesn't 100% have to mean that this character is a sage. It could simply be a callback to a previous character from Zelda. This could be an entirely different person, but I do feel the implication is that this character is a sage. But there's a little bit more here, because this character's hand looks like the same hand that Link has. Maybe this is the hand that was holding down Ganondorf from the tomb, and also maybe this is the character that we hear from what we assume is the voice of Zelda asking to aid Link. So this character might even be our companion character throughout the adventure in Tears of the Kingdom. He just might be one of the coolest companion characters yet. Well, what did you guys make of my theories? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments below. Anyways everyone, this is On Just Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.